Are we waiting for the jury, ladies and gentlemen? Waiting for the jury, counsel?
We are ready. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Let's call on the jury. Thank you. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Counsel. You may proceed.
Mr. Escobar, let's start out with nailing down your understanding of OPD's use of force policy, okay?
Yes, sir.
So you made the statement, and I wrote it in quotes, I struck him because he is resisting arrest.
Correct.
Now, you would agree that you can't just strike anybody who's resisting arrest, right?
If somebody's resisting arrest, they can be struck, yes.
So it's your understanding of policy that you can use a closed fist strike to anybody who's resisting.
If they're actively resisting, yes.
Okay, well let's be more specific, because you just made the statement resisting arrest.
Okay.
All right? So you do not believe that you can use a closed fist strike just because someone is resisting generally.
If they're actively resisting, yes.
Right. Active resisting is what your understanding is.
Correct.
All right. And what is your understanding of active resisting?
It is a person that's trying to escape from a lawful arrest.
And you also said that it's in the officer's discretion whether or not you can strike them.
Correct.
So you get to decide what amount of force you use. That's your understanding.
Within the parameters of the level of resistance, yes.
Okay, but when asked why you did it, you said because it's in your discretion, right?
Correct. You can use force at your discretion.
That was your understanding on that night.
If you, yes.
A person resists and they can be struck.
If they're actively resisting, yes.
But that's not what you said. You just said resisting,
Okay.
correct? Correct?
Correct.
And it's at your discretion to use whatever force you believe is necessary.
Within the parameters of the Orlando Police policies and procedures, yes.
Okay, so now we've got that clarified. You're adding that second part, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, you are friends with Officer Joel Williams, correct?
Correct.
You hang out socially together, right?
I would say so.
You would say so.
Yes.
Right. And you contacted him about this trial and testifying, correct?
Just to be on the lookout for the fact that my case was coming to trial, yes.
Okay. Now, when you first started testifying, you described why you responded to the scene. Do you remember giving that description?
Yes.
Right. And do you remember saying that it was unspecified weapons? Remember saying that?
Correct.
Right. And you understand that your use of force can be elevated if weapons are suspected to be involved, right?
Yes.
Because it's a greater danger to you, correct?
Correct.
And counsel asked you about the report that you authored in this case, correct?
Correct.
And it's in evidence, right?
Yes, I believe so.
But you didn't make any reference to weapons in your report, did you?
If I can see my report, I
You
can.
certainly can. In fact, we'll just use the one in there. Your Honor, may I approach the witness what's been marked as State's Exhibit 4?
Yes, sir.
Read your first paragraph to yourself, officer.
Okay.
Now, in that first paragraph, you give a description as to what you were being called out for, right?
Correct.
And you didn't say anything about weapons, did you?
No.
So your testimony that you believe there were weapons present came for the first time today, right?
Not necessarily, no.
You didn't document it in this report, did you?
Okay, if we're talking, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You didn't document it in your report.
That there was unknown weapons, no, I did not document that.
So the first time you said it is here today in court, in
Yes.
regards to the statement. Okay. And you said that because you know that use of force is permitted to be greater for you if there are weapons present or believed to be present, right?
It doesn't necessarily mean that, no. But if there are, the call as it read said there was unknown weapons, so we can't automatically assume that there is a weapon.
Well, but you made the assumption in front of the jury, right? You wanted them to believe that there were weapons or that you thought there were weapons on the scene.
Objection, Your Honor. It's argumentative.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
If every call is prefaced with unknown weapons or known weapons.
But
If
you didn't
that's what
preface
said.
any of that in your report, correct?
That's not necessary in the report.
According to you, it's not necessary.
Yes, because I'm the one who writes the report.
Okay.
yes.
Now, would you agree with me that you took a lot of the actions you did on this night because you were in fear?
Because I was in fear and because it was something I had never experienced in my life. And I was,
Well,
yes.
a few minutes ago, you told this jury that you believed you were going to die. That was your exact quote, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you took some actions based upon, according to you, your fear that night, right?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, no. But
Okay, so you were not in fear that night.
I was in fear.
All right, but you're just saying now that
That's-
your actions were not based upon that fear? Is that your
It
testimony?
raises your level of awareness, but it doesn't necessarily, cause for use of force.
Okay, then why would you tell the jury you believe you're going to die? Why is that relevant if it's not relevant to your use of force?
Because that's what I was experiencing that night. That's what crossed my head.
And that's relevant to your use of force, right?
Not necessarily.
So now you're saying that you can't use increased force if you think your life is in danger?
Of course you can.
Okay, all
Yes.
right. So you made that statement in order to be able to say, I used increased force or had to use increased force, right?
Not necessarily increased force, but the force that's justified, yes.
All right, we'll say that. We'll say that you made the statement you believed you were going to die because you were justifying your use of force, right?
No.
At least in part.
No.
So all of your force had nothing to do with your being in fear that night. Is that your testimony?
It was responding to Mr. Holloway's resistance.
Okay, so we don't need to consider your fear as to why you did what you did. Is that what you're telling us?
It is a factor, but it is not the ultimate
Okay.
decision.
Mr. Escobar,
Yes.
your fear was a factor in why you did what you did. Is that what you're saying?
I guess you can say that, yeah.
Okay, and that's why you said you felt like you were going to die.
Yes.
All right. Now, you told the jury that Officer Williams drew his gun, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that on that night, the firearm that Officer Williams was carrying had a flashlight on the end, right?
Yes.
And you would agree that the scene, I'm not going to show you all the video, it's an evidence, that the scene that night was at least somewhat dark, right?
Yeah, it wasn't fully lit, but yes.
To the extent that the flashlight needed to be used on the end of the firearm, right?
I don't remember that exactly, but
Okay, do you remember the flashlight on the end of the gun?
I know there's a flashlight on the end of the gun, yes.
Do you know if it was on?
I don't know that for a fact.
Okay, so now you saw the gun, but you don't know if it had a flashlight that was illuminated.
Yes. I know that there's a flashlight, but I couldn't tell if the flashlight was on or off.
Now, you gave us a lot of detail about what you observed Officer Williams do in relation to Mr. Holloway, right?
Correct.
But you don't know this detail as to whether the flashlight was on.
No.
Okay. And at the time you were observing Officer Williams drawing his gun, you were dealing with Mr. Shields, correct?
At that time, I had finished securing Mr. Shields.
All right, so when did you stop dealing with Mr. Shields and look up to make the observations that you did?
Just before Officer Williams drew his handgun.
All right. Now, going back to the statement that you thought you were going to die, at that point you were at the far end of the grassy vacant lot, right? The end away from the street, correct?
I was further away from the street, but I wasn't at the far end because it continues, but yes, I was.
Okay, you were further away.
Yes.
In the immediate vicinity of Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Right? And I believe you also said that you believed you were going to have to use deadly force. Right?
Correct.
Right. And at this point, you've seen Officer Williams draw his firearm.
Correct.
Right? Did you ever draw your firearm?
No.
So your testimony to the jury is that you believe deadly force was going to be necessary.
Correct.
But you never pulled your gun.
If he's not threatening me at that moment, I don't have my gun now.
Well, you said you thought you were going to die.
Yes.
And you didn't feel it was necessary to draw your firearm.
At that moment, no.
Well, let's just take it a step further. At any moment, did you decide that it was necessary to draw your firearm?
No.
So your level of concern was never great enough that you even ever removed your firearm from the holster, was it?
No, I probably had my hand on my gun, but I didn't draw my handgun, no.
You never drew it, even though you're testifying, leading this jury to believe that you thought you were going to die that night.
Correct.
You testified on direct examination that Rufus Holloway was walking away from Officer Williams and not complying with his commands, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you said that Officer Williams holstered his firearm and then removed the spray and sprayed Mr. Holloway, correct?
Correct.
And then you said that he appeared disoriented and walked around and then went to the ground, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you testified that he was walking in the vicinity or towards the street, right?
Right.
And that's why you believe that he was going to escape.
Yes.
So you believe that a disoriented man walking was trying to escape.
It's possible, yes.
I didn't ask if it was possible. I said, did you believe at that point that a disoriented man who's been pepper sprayed was trying to escape?
Yes.
You did. Okay. Now, you do recall writing the sworn statement that is now in evidence, right?
Yes.
And you swore to it and everything, and it's true, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Well, no. The oath does say to my best of my knowledge. You swore that what was in there was true, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you never said that you saw Mr. Holloway walking around, did you? And
No,
if you'd
I-
like to look at it, I can show it to you.
No, I didn't.
You said he was pepper sprayed and went to the ground, right?
Correct.
And that conveys a sense of immediacy in time. Spray, ground, correct?
I guess you can make that assumption.
Well, you wrote it. So that's what you wrote, right?
Yes.
So this testimony about he was sprayed and then walked around, that's the first time we're hearing that is today, correct?
From my end, yes.
Okay. Well, from your end, because you sat and listened to the witnesses testify in this trial, right?
Yes.
So you had the benefit of listening to them and what they were going to say before you testified.
Yes, but I'm testifying.
Okay. So I believe you also said that Mr. Holloway approached the two of you, yourself and Officer Williams, right?
Correct.
It wasn't that Officer Williams approached Mr. Holloway, correct?
Correct.
Right. And you said that when Mr. Holloway got to yourself and Officer Williams was a foot or two away from you, correct?
I didn't say a foot or two away. I said a couple of feet.
A couple of feet. A
Yes.
couple is 2, right?
It's just a broad term to name a number, but it's not, I'm not locking to a specific number.
All right. Let me try to do that. Do you know, can you tell us how far away from yourself Officer Williams was when Mr. Holloway got to the 2 of you?
I don't know exactly.
It was close.
It was close.
All right. And you said Mr. Holloway got close to Officer Williams, right?
Yes.
Close enough to touch him.
Yes.
And that's when this kick occurred, correct?
Yes.
Up there where you guys were, near Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Yes. And according to your report, the pepper spray occurred immediately afterwards, right?
Once he started walking away, but yes.
Okay. And then he went straight to the ground, he being Mr. Holloway, right? At least that's what you documented in your report.
Yes.
So Mr. Holloway wouldn't be way down by the sidewalk where he is in the video, according to your testimony, now would he?
I said he was walking away when Officer Williams told him to get on the ground. And then once he was disoriented and went to the ground, he was at a distance from us.
Okay, so Officer Williams had to chase him down to pepper spray.
Yes.
Did you document that in your report?
No.
Okay. So first time again is when you're saying it here today.
Yes.
You testified that when you changed positions with Officer Williams, you were kicked in the shin by Mr. Holloway. Is that right?
Correct.
And you were describing how he was kicking backwards, right?
Correct.
And at this point, you have gone from near or farther away from the street towards the street, right?
Correct.
And that's where the crowd was, right?
Correct.
Right. And you stated that one of your major concerns, one of your concerns was that a crowd was building, correct?
Yes.
And that was an officer safety issue. I think you said 4 or 5 times, the crowd, right?
Yes.
Right. So you ran towards the crowd, and you didn't have a weapon in your hand, correct?
Yes, I did.
You did not have a weapon.
I did not.
All right. So according to you, you're running towards a hostile crowd, right?
I'm not running towards the crowd. I'm running to Mr. Holloway.
And Mr. Holloway is in the direction of the crowd.
Correct.
Okay. So you're running towards the crowd.
Correct.
All right. And you said, your testimony was that Mr. Holloway was disoriented. Right?
Yes.
In other words, he did not appear to you to really know where it was or what was going on. Right?
No, he appeared to know where he was going when he was walking away from Officer Williams, and then after he got sprayed, he was disoriented.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I'm talking about after he was sprayed, you said he was disoriented.
Yes.
All right. And you said that he was kicking backwards. So at this point, he's on the ground, right?
Yes.
So a man is pepper sprayed, disoriented, and on the ground, correct?
Yes.
And your officer safety concern was him striking you in the shin.
Yes.
Now, you went through a detailed description of the application of handcuffs to Mr. Holloway. Remember doing that on direct examination?
I was explaining the application of handcuffs to Mr. Shields, not to Mr. Holloway.
You said that you put Mr. Holloway in handcuffs.
I did.
Because then you talked about how you were mistaken about the order in which you did things.
Yes.
All right. And when you were testifying about that, you said at least 3 times that Mr. Holloway had his hands up under his body. Correct?
Correct.
And the significance of that to you was that you believed he might have some weapon. Right?
Yes.
All right. So we would expect to see Mr. Holloway's hands under his body on video. Is that right?
If the video started where that was, yes.
Okay, so your testimony is that that happened before the video started, right?
Yes.
Okay. And once again, you remember writing a report in this case, correct?
Yes.
And you never said anything about Mr. Holloway's hands being under his body in your report, did you?
No.
All right. So you just told us that it's an important fact for officer safety that he had his hands underneath his body, right?
Yes.
And you knew that this report was being reviewed in part for your use of force, correct?
Yes.
But you failed to document the key fact that his hands were underneath his body, right?
Yes.
The first time you decided to say that was in front of these jurors here today. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Because in your report you just said he was rolling on the ground.
He was.
You also, in your direct examination, were asked to look at the video when Mr. Holloway is on the ground after you dragged him away. Do you remember being asked about that?
About the body camera video?
Correct.
Yes.
And you were shown some still photographs of Mr. Holloway with his legs somewhat in the air, right?
It wasn't in the air.
It wasn't flat, correct?
It was positioned not flat, yes.
All right. Now, isn't it true that Mr. Holloway never moved after you threw him on the ground?
No, that's not true.
Okay, so it's your position and your testimony that the video is going to show Mr. Holloway actively curling up on his side after you throw him on the ground.
After I put him on the ground, yes, he rolled onto his left side.
It's not that he just stayed exactly where he was.
No.
All right. The video's in evidence, people can watch it. Just want to make sure I understand what your position is. You said also that Mr. Holloway was not being compliant because he was raising his head, correct?
Correct.
And you've already described for the members of the jury a disoriented man who'd been pepper sprayed, right?
Correct.
And I believe that Sergeant Haddock said that on his direct examination, part of your training is that you get pepper sprayed. Is that right?
Correct.
So that you can understand the effects of it.
Correct.
All right, so you've been pepper sprayed.
Correct.
It makes it hard to breathe, right?
It does.
So you said the reason, the cue that you took from Mr. Holloway not being compliant was that his head was up, right?
Not only his head coming up.
That was one cue, that his head was coming up,
Yes.
right? But if his head had been flat down on the ground, in the dirt, he wouldn't be able to breathe, right?
If his face is flat on the ground, whether he's handcuffed or, whether he's sprayed or not, he's not going to be able to breathe.
Yes. So you're telling us that the cue that he's trying to resist when he's really just trying to breathe.
If his face is in the ground, he can't breathe, yes.
Correct. So he lifted his face to breathe. That's possible. You would agree with that?
The compliant position would be to lay your head on the ground.
And when he didn't do that, because he couldn't breathe, is when you struggled.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation that he can't breathe. We don't know that he can't breathe.
He can ask the question. Don't speculate if you don't know the answer, officer.
Do you know?
If he can breathe or not?
Correct.
No, I don't.
Well, you do know that Mr. Holloway was complaining about being able to breathe after this incident, wasn't he?
I don't know where that would be at, but that could be possible, yes.
Do you remember it?
Off the top of my head, no.
Okay. Did you watch the video?
Which video are you referring to?
The body camera video. You said you watched the body camera video the same night, right?
Yes.
All right. Do you remember him screaming from the patrol car he couldn't breathe?
I don't recall that independently, but if it was on the video, that's what's on there.
Do you ever remember giving any aid to Mr. Holloway that night?
Once we went to the secondary location, he was decontaminated.
Okay. And how long did that take?
The amount of time that it took from driving from that location to the secondary location.
Okay. So he didn't receive aid until after you got to the secondary location.
Correct.
And you don't remember if he was screaming that he couldn't breathe?
Independently, no, but if it's on the video, that's what's on the video.
But he was your arrestee, right?
He wasn't my arrestee.
You put the handcuffs on him.
I was arresting him for Officer Williams.
Oh, you were doing it for him. So you didn't consider him to be your responsibility at that point.
He's my responsibility for transporting him, but for arresting purposes,
Okay.
he is Officer Williams' arrestee.
So you agree with me that he was your responsibility, correct?
Correct.
And you knew he had been pepper sprayed, right?
Correct.
And you knew you delivered strikes to him, right?
Correct.
But you didn't render any aid or even ask about any aid until you got to the secondary location. Isn't that right?
Because of the crowd, yes.
Okay. We'll get back to the crowd in a second. You testified about your level of stress that night. Do you remember talking about that?
Yes.
And that, I believe you used that as an explanation as to why you got mixed up on the sequence, correct?
Correct.
Right. And you would agree that the sequence is important, correct?
Within regards to the strikes?
Yes.
Not necessarily, no.
You don't believe that the level of force that you could use or should use depended upon whether he was handcuffed or not?
If a person is actively resisting, whether they are handcuffed or not, I'm still authorized to use force.
That's your understanding with your discretion.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. So we were talking about stress. And that, I guess you were trying to say that people misremember things? Was that the point of that?
Yes.
And so it's your testimony that you just misremembered the sequence of events this night. Is that right?
Yes, because it was so close together, yes.
Okay. But you had assistance to help you remember what happened, didn't you?
Part of it, yes.
Okay. You had the body camera from Officer LaCentra, right?
Yes.
Right. And in the body camera, you can see your arm come back to deliver the strikes, right?
Yes.
So the body camera captures the moments that you're delivering the strikes.
In part, yes.
In part. But it's your testimony that even watching that didn't help you remember the sequence.
No, it didn't, because it doesn't show whether he's handcuffed or not.
Did you make it clear in your report that you weren't exactly certain as to when you delivered or delivered those strikes?
No.
You were pretty definitive in your report, weren't you?
Yes.
You definitively said or wrote under oath that you struck him, correct?
Yes.
And then you applied the handcuffs.
Yes.
Because you had to justify you were striking him, right?
Again, the response to resistance doesn't matter if somebody's actively resisting, whether they're in or out of handcuffs.
Sure doesn't look good to punch somebody in handcuffs, so does it?
It is what it is. If somebody's actively resisting, you can use force.
Now, you heard Sergeant Haddock talking about the level of force that is or should be used, right?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that there were levels of force that were less intense that you could have used to gain compliance from Mr. Holloway?
Yes, there are.
In other words, you could have put him in a wrist lock while you were on his back, right?
I could have,
And
technically.
that would have been pain compliance.
Theoretically, yes.
What do you mean theoretically?
If you want to use that type of force, then yes, you can.
Okay, and specifically, you could have done that night, right?
I wouldn't say that I could have.
You were on top of Mr. Holloway,
Yes.
correct? And you managed to get both his hands together, right?
Yes.
And you put both his hands in your hands to apply handcuffs, right?
Yes.
And that means his wrists are available to you for a wrist lock, correct?
They are available, yes.
So you could have used a less intensive technique to gain compliance from Mr. Holloway, right?
I could have, yes.
But you did not do that.
No.
You chose to use a more intensive technique, which is closed fist strikes.
It was the quickest reaction that I can get at the moment, yes.
rearing back and punching him was quicker than using his wrist, which you already had in your hands?
I didn't have his wrist in my hands per se.
What do you mean per se? You applied handcuffs, sir.
Yes, but I wasn't holding both his wrists at that moment.
You had at least one wrist, right, that was available for the lock?
Yes.
Okay. But you chose to deliver the strikes, right?
Yes.
And not just deliver the strikes, but deliver them to an intensified area of his body, correct?
Correct.
And that's the head or neck, right?
The shoulder area, yes.
Well, you wrote in your report that you struck him on the upper back, neck, or shoulder areas. So you at least acknowledged in your report that you struck him in the upper neck or back,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. When you were talking about the body camera video of Officer Escobar, you said that one of the reasons you review it is because it's important evidence, right?
Yes.
You used one of the purposes of reviewing that video is to prove the crime that is alleged to have occurred, right?
Yes.
But you were aware that there was other video from that incident that night, weren't you?
No, I was not aware.
You were aware that Ms. Fripp video recorded that incident, weren't you?
No, I didn't.
You didn't know that night.
I didn't.
You didn't have a discussion with Officer Williams about that.
About her cell phone video?
Correct.
No.
Okay. Do you know if he ever made any attempt to get her video? I'm asking if you know. If you don't know, you don't know.
I don't know.
Okay. And it's your testimony that, well, were you angry at Mr. Holloway?
No.
At no point did you ever get upset with his, according to you, lack of compliance. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
And I believe you justified or said that the reason you made the statement to him that's on the video is because he wasn't listening to your prior commands.
Correct.
So rather than repeating them, you decided to use the expletive, right?
Correct.
Was there, according to you, was there any doubt in your mind that he didn't know you were a law enforcement officer?
There was no doubt in my mind.
Okay, so why would you say we're the police? Don't you know we're the police? If you knew that he already knew you were a law enforcement officer, why would you say that?
That's just the word that the language that I used that day. I was trying to get through to him.
Would you agree with me, Officer Escobar, that once Mr. Holloway was in your handcuffs, he was in your custody?
Yes.
Right. And would you also agree with me that a person in your custody, you're responsible for that person, right?
Yes.
To make sure that they don't get injured.
Yes.
Because a person who's in handcuffs is completely at your will, right?
Not necessarily.
They can't even scratch their face if their nose itches, right?
They can't do that, but they can do other
If
things.
you push them forward, they're going to fall flat on their face, right?
If the person doesn't do anything, yes.
Yeah, well, they can't do anything, sir, because their hands are behind their back. So if you push them forward, they're going to fall flat on their face, right?
Yes.
All right. And knowing that, you have to be careful with that person, correct?
Correct.
But on this occasion, you placed the person in handcuffs and punched them twice in the back of the head, right?
Not in the back of the head, but the general area of upper shoulder.
Why twice? You said that you struck him to gain compliance. Why strike him twice?
That's just the amount of times that I chose to strike him that night.
Because it was your decision, right? Because that's what you felt like doing.
Because he was actively resisting, yes.
No, that's why you struck him once. The second strike was because that's what you wanted to do. Right?
No. I felt that it was necessary to use that amount of force
Why?
because he was actively resisting.
Did you give him an opportunity to comply after the first strike?
No.
So that was not the least amount of force you could use with the strike, was it?
No.
Now, you testified about your fear of the crowd, correct?
Correct.
And you said that you described them as angry about the fact that an arrest was being made, right?
Yes.
And you've been pretty detailed about how officer safety dictates a lot of what you do on a daily basis as an officer, correct?
Yes.
And you described how officer safety dictated many of the actions that you took on this night, according to you, correct?
Yes.
And you don't turn your back on a threat, right? As a law enforcement officer.
If you can't help it, then you don't.
Correct. It's in your mind that you shouldn't turn your back on a threat, right?
Yes.
Right. And you, according to your testimony, thought that the people in this crowd was a threat, right?
Yes.
And you were in fear of that. Yes?
Yes.
Now, you turned your back on the crowd when you were gaining compliance from Mr. Holloway, right?
Correct.
And you had your back turned to the crowd the entire time that you were dragging them away, right?
Not entirely the whole time, but
So the
partially.
time that you punched them in the back, or in the neck, or in the head, wherever you punched them, according to you, to the time that you drove them to the secondary location, you never turned around to check the crowd, did you?
No, because I knew Officer Williams was there.
Okay. And you knew Officer Williams was concerned about the crowd. He was watching you, right?
Yes.
So Officer Williams never turned his back on the crowd either. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
All right. So, isn't it true, Officer Escobar, that you go 1 minute and 40 seconds before you ever turn around to face the crowd of people in that video?
I don't know that for a fact, but if that's what the video shows, then yes.
Because first you place or throw Mr. Holloway on the ground, right?
Yes.
And you kick him or nudge him, if you want to use your term, right?
Yes.
And then there's a period of time that's about 1 minute where you're kind of standing around. You remember doing that?
On the video, yes.
Okay. And at no time do you turn around to face this threat that you've described, do you?
I can see people out of the peripheral of my eyes, but yes.
Out of the peripheral of your eyes?
Yes.
As you're facing away from the crowd, your periphery can see the people directly behind you?
I'm not directly my back isn't completely to the crowd the entire time, no.
Okay. So you disagree with my statement that the video shows that you never turned around to face the crowd. Is that your testimony?
I wasn't directly facing the crowd, but I was at an angle.
Okay, so your testimony is you could see from the angle you were at, you could see what was going on with the crowd.
Somewhat, yes.
Well, you said that that was a danger to you, right?
Yes.
You said you were going to die. You believed you were going to die, right?
Yes, but not at the hands of the crowd.
Okay, at the hands of Mr. Holloway.
Correct.
But your sense is heightened. You're scared of this crowd, according to you, right?
Yes.
And you never turned directly to face them, did you?
Not directly face them, no.
And your testimony is that Officer Williams was facing them the entire time, and that's the reason why.
Yes, I know he's going to watch my back.
You made an assumption, or did you see him do it?
No, I know he's going to watch. It's not an assumption. I know that if I'm handling one person, he's going to watch everything else.
Did you see Officer Williams watching the crowd for you?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. No further questions?
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Escobar, you indicated that you thought at one point in time that you might die that night. What was going through your mind? Why did you think that? and not draw your gun?
I was observing Mr. Holloway's actions, and I was sort of in a shock. I couldn't believe what was happening.
Did you think about what he could do, not necessarily just what he was doing?
Objection of meeting. We're going to do the same thing over just council meeting.
Your Honor, I'm trying to clarify what he testified to earlier, which
Yeah.
was,
Well, just be careful about leading.
yes, Your Honor. Officer Escobar, you testified earlier that you observed Mr. Holloway catch Mr. Escobar's foot. Is that correct?
Officer Williams is
Officer Williams' foot.
Yes.
And what was it about that that made you fear for your life?
The fact that Mr. Holloway ran or quickly approached Officer Williams, and Officer Williams had to retreat from his position to now create distance between them two.
Do Officer Williams still have the two guns in his hand?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Was there anything about that that made you fear for your life?
Yes, the fact that he's approaching an officer, an armed officer with two handguns in his hands, yes.
I believe you testified earlier that you were concerned he was going to take one of the guns from him.
Yes.
Is that what made you fear for your life?
Objection.
Yes.
So be. And ask and answer.
Well, they are asked and answered. However, I think this part of the case is going in relatively good speed, so I'll allow some of that in summary. Try not to leave.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, in cross, you testified that you were one of the reasons that you were concerned that Mr. Holloway had his hands underneath him because he might have a gun. Was that the only thing about that concerned you?
No.
Okay. What else concerned you about that?
The fact that I hadn't searched him up until that point.
Okay. If his hands are underneath him. Is there anything else about the fact that his hands are underneath him that concerned you about his ability to escape?
Yeah, he can push up off the ground and at that point escape.
Now, on cross, you were asked about having your back to the crowd. The crowd that you could hear was hostile. Did you ever look over your shoulder?
I did.
Were you able to see the crowd when you looked over your shoulder?
Yes.
Were you able to see, from the position that you're in, were you able to see Officer Williams in front of you?
Yes.
Were you able to see that he had one gun in his hand at that point?
Yes.
Were you able to see Officer LaCintra?
I saw him later, but yes.
Okay. And was that a point that you had your back to the crowd?
Yeah, once we have three officers on scene, I feel a little bit, I guess the scene is a little bit more stable.
And at the point that you moved Mr. Holloway from the location that he was in, at that point you had two officers in front of you. Is that correct?
Yes, I have.
So be.
Sustain.
Now, I also want to clear something up. In the body cam video, we see Mr. Holloway being taken away to another location. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, are you the one driving?
No.
Is there another officer driving?
Yes.
The discussion that you see on the body cam about his face or the burning, is that with you?
No, it's not.
Is that with the officer that's driving?
Yes.
In relation to your training with regard to the pepper spray, have you ever heard the term, if you can talk, you can breathe?
Of course.
Have you ever used that term?
I've never used the term, but if somebody can scream whatever or can talk to me, I know that they can breathe. It's just a secondary effect of the OC spray.
Now, as part of your training, when you're trained to have somebody lay in a prone position, does it require their mouth to be over the dirt or over the ground?
No, they're supposed to either have their face turned one direction or the other.
And if they do that, are they in the prone position?
Yes.
Okay. And can they breathe in that position?
Yes.
Does a person have to lift their head up off the ground to breathe?
No.
In fact, you testified earlier that can be a sign of something else.
Yes.
Now, the state suggested to you that one option you had when Mr. Holloway was handcuffed was to bend his wrist or apply pressure. When you had Mr. Holloway handcuffed, you decided to strike him. Why did you decide to strike him instead of bending his wrist?
It was the quickest response that I can respond to his resistance at the moment without fumbling around too much.
The point that you struck him was Mr. Holloway in the process of turning or rolling on his side.
Yes, he was.
And would bending his hands have prevented him from rolling on his side?
Objection, leading.
I'll allow it.
I can actually rephrase, Your Honor.
Okay.
When Mr. Holloway was trying to roll on his side, why did you decide to strike him at that point instead of bending his wrist?
It was the quickest way I could see to use force to obtain control over him because he was now attempting to stand up.
Would simply bending his wrist as he tried to turn onto his side where his wrists were, would that prevent him from rolling or standing up?
Personally, I wouldn't think in that situation it would have prevented him from rolling.
And we can see on the video this all happens in a matter of about 1 second. Did you consider your options there, or did you make the decision for some other reason?
I decided on that moment that the quickest way for me to maintain or have some type of control over him would be to strike him at that moment.
And after you struck him the first time, did he comply and lay flat at that point?
No.
Okay. You struck him a second time. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they were within quick succession. Is that correct?
Yes, there was no gap in between.
And you watched the body cam after this. Were you able to see whether or not Mr. Holloway's hands were handcuffed at that time?
I could not see if his hands were handcuffed or not.
Now, the state also asked you about about use of force and whose decision is that is. I believe you testified that it was your decision, the officer's decision?
Correct.
Okay. And what is that decision based on?
Based on the totality of circumstances, what is going on at the moment, whether there's any weapons involved, hostility of a crowd being there, known violence from the person who you are arresting.
Okay. And do you get to decide what force is used, or is there some guidelines that you're given?
There's guidelines that are provided.
Okay. So your decision to use force, when you indicate that it's the officer's decision to use force, is that based on all those factors?
Yes, on the responsive resistance techniques.
The state also indicated that if someone is handcuffed and you push them, they're just going to fall over. What if the person has a foot, one foot in front of the other? Does that mean they're automatically going to fall over?
No.
Okay. Is it possible for someone to still, is it possible for a suspect to still resist you even when they're in handcuffs?
Yes.
Does it mean that they're going to do whatever you tell them to do just because they're in handcuffs?
Absolutely not.
Does it mean that they're under your complete control once they have handcuffs on?
No.
Now, the report that you wrote, it's, what, about 1 page?
Roughly, yes.
And is that the only report that's written in relation to this case?
No.
Did somebody else write a report?
Yes.
Okay. And does your report show every single detail, or every single, does it identify every single thing that took place that night?
No.
But what you did put in the report is that you struck Mr. Holloway
Correct.
and that you kicked him.
Correct.
You didn't leave that out.
I did not leave that out.
You testified, the state asked you questions about Mr. Holloway kicking back and about him being disoriented. When he was kicking backwards, where were you standing?
I was standing at his rear, I guess left 45-degree angle. I would be standing towards his left, by his left leg, but kind of angled to the...
Were you giving him any commands?
Yes.
Was he kicking in your direction?
Yes.
Did it appear that he kicked you intentionally?
Yes.
Action, speculation is that is known to reveal persons for their intentions.
Well, don't try to speculate if you don't know. That's the best thing I can say about that.
Did your ability to keep Mr. Holloway under control, did that raise an issue of officer safety concern to you?
Yes.
Okay. Is that why you struck Mr. Holloway?
Yes, because he was actively resisting.
While there's other force that you could use, did you feel that the force you used was reasonable under the circumstances?
I believe that was the most reasonable and appropriate, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay.
I have one other objection.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Escobar,
Yes.
Specifically, I asked you if you recalled Mr. Holloway screaming and saying he couldn't breathe, right?
Yes, I remember you asking that.
Yeah, and you told me you didn't have any memory of that, right?
From that night, no.
No, sir. You told me you didn't have any memory of it on the video.
An independent recollection is what I
Okay.
said.
But then when defense counsel asked you if you remember that conversation, you said yes.
Which conversation?
The conversation about Mr. Holloway not being able to breathe. He asked you, do you remember a conversation about Mr. Holloway being able to breathe? Was that with you? And you said no, right?
That was on the video.
Okay. So now you're clarifying video.
Yes.
All right. No further questions.
All right.
No further questions, Your Honor?
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Your Honor, let me just confirm that everything's in evidence.
Yeah, and we need to check in regard to timing. We've agreed to quit by 4:30 today, probably a little bit more or earlier to get our juror out, I guess. So think about the timing and advise me about that.
Could we approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we just had a little scheduling discussion, and there are always these procedural things that we do which take up a little bit of your time, and we are going to need to do some of those things. And we thought, since we promised to break by 4:30, we could let you go early and come back, because even these procedural issues and arguments and things, we'll end up coming back tomorrow anyway if we're going to break by 4:30. So we're thinking we're going to let you go early and come back at 8:30 and wrap it up. Okay? Yeah, we all sort of came ready for 2 days, and so this just makes it a little bit more comfortable in that regard. And you get to skip one of those procedural breaks, which makes you wonder what we could be doing for so long. So we'll keep working, but we'll let you go. Okay, remember again not to read anything or look at anything about the case or talk to anybody about it. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Let us know if you need anything. Okay.